Would you still be kind if the family who raised you treated you like a servant? Her silent strength changed everything. From the outside, Redford Mansion was a masterpiece of grandeur. Tall white columns stood like sentinels around the massive estate. Acres of sculpted hedges lined the circular driveway, and imported Italian stones sparkled under the sunlight. The mansion appeared in charity brochures and local magazines, always with phrases like "pillar of the community" and "beacon of grace." To anyone passing by, it was the portrait of American aristocracy. But for Naomi Turner, it was a gilded cage. Naomi was 5 years old when she first walked through the tall French doors of Redford Mansion. Her mother, a brilliant pianist, had died in a tragic car accident, and with no father listed on her birth certificate, she became an orphan overnight. The Redfords, Charles and Eleanor, took her in, presenting it as an act of charity. But to Naomi, it was something else entirely. The first thing she remembered about the mansion wasn't the marble foyer or the grand staircase. It was the silence. A silence so heavy it wrapped around her like a verdict. Charles and Eleanor Redford didn't yell. They didn't raise their voices or lock her away. They didn't need to. Their silence spoke louder than any words. Naomi was given a bed with a white canopy and a closet full of dresses she didn't choose. She was introduced to their friends as "our adopted daughter," a phrase always said with a polished smile, but delivered with a subtle air of superiority. She was a symbol of the Redfords' generosity and moral goodness, a prop to enhance their image as compassionate members of the community. But behind closed doors, Naomi was an outsider. She was never allowed to call them Mum or Dad. The first time she tried, Eleanor's voice was sharp but polite. "Naomi, dear, it's better if you call us Mr. and Mrs. Redford. It's just more respectful." Naomi learned quickly. Respect in the Redford house meant silence, obedience, and gratitude, whether she felt it or not. Her childhood was a collection of contradictions. She had access to the best schools, but was never allowed to join the debate team. "Your voice doesn't carry the right authority," Charles would say, his tone calm but dismissive. She was praised for her grades in private, but never acknowledged in public. At family galas, she stood 2 steps behind Victor and Clara, her adopted siblings, like a shadow, always present but never part of the picture. On holiday cards, she was either cropped out or made to wear colors that helped her blend in. Her hair was straightened chemically every month, her natural curls tamed to fit the family's image. Her skin was compared to coffee or chocolate in offhand jokes that no one else found funny, and she learned to laugh along because it was easier than arguing. By the time she turned 16, Naomi had stopped asking why. Victor, the eldest, became a rising attorney, cold, calculated, and always dressed in blues and greys as if color itself was beneath him. Clara, 2 years younger than Naomi, was a social media darling, a columnist for a lifestyle magazine who wore pastel dresses and curated her image with expert precision. They were the perfect Redford children. And Naomi? She was a silent accessory to their image, a living symbol of their kindness. To the outside world, the Redfords were generous, loving, and respectable. But Naomi knew better. She was a guest in their world, dressed in fine clothes, but never allowed to choose them, educated in elite schools, but never allowed to speak for herself. She was expected to be grateful, compliant, and invisible. But something inside Naomi refused to break. Beneath the surface of polite smiles and silent obedience, a quiet resolve began to grow. She learned to read the room, to hear the unspoken words between conversations, to see the subtle ways people used power. And she promised herself that one day she would escape this gilded cage, no with anger, but with quiet dignity, because even a caged bird learns to fly when no one is watching. Naomi Turner was always present but never truly seen. Within the pristine halls of Redford Mansion, she moved like a shadow, polite, silent, and always out of focus. Her place in the family was clear from the start. Not a daughter, not a sister, but something else. But something that enhanced the Redfords' image, but never touched their hearts. They never hurt her, not physically. But the cold, calculated distance was its own form of cruelty. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. But they didn't need to. Their approval was like a distant star, bright and beautiful, but forever out of reach. Naomi's childhood was a series of lessons in invisibility. At school, she excelled, earning top grades in every subject. But when the honor roll was announced, her name was skipped during family dinners. "Of course you did well," Charles Redford would say, his voice smooth and disinterested. "That's expected." At family gatherings, she was dressed in muted colors, always 2 steps behind Victor and Clara. Her siblings were the stars, Victor with his sharp suits and future-in-law, Clara with her pastel gowns and perfect social media presence. They were the Redfords the world admired. Naomi was the silent proof of their generosity, a child saved but never truly embraced. She wasn't allowed to join the debate team because your voice doesn't carry the right authority, Charles explained, his tone as cold as the marble floors beneath her feet. She wasn't allowed to speak up in family discussions because it's best if you observe and learn. Her voice was an inconvenience, her thoughts unnecessary. Eleanor Redford, her adoptive mother, was always perfectly composed. She smiled at charity galas, her hand resting lightly on Naomi's shoulder, but the touch was cold. When guests praised the Redfords for their heart of gold in adopting Naomi, Eleanor's smile would widen. "We believe in giving back," she would say, as if Naomi were a donation receipt rather than a human being. Naomi's appearance was always carefully controlled. Her natural curls were chemically straightened every month, her thick, beautiful hair transformed into something that fit the family image. Her dark brown skin was compared to coffee or chocolate in offhand jokes that no one else found offensive. "Such an exotic look," Eleanor's friends would murmur, admiring her as if she were a work of art rather than a person. But the worst was the silence, the heavy, stifling silence that followed every polite rejection, every subtle correction. It was a silence that told Naomi she should be grateful, that she should be quiet, that she should not ask for more than she was given. "Your name will always be Turner," Charles once told her when she asked why she couldn't take the family's last name. "But you are part of the family, of course." In our own way, that was the truth. She was a Turner, a reminder of a charity case, a trophy of their generosity, but never a true Redford. As Naomi grew older, she learned to navigate the maze of invisible walls around her. She spoke when spoken to, smiled politely, and never dared to question the family's choices. She watched Victor and Clara flourish, praised and admired by family and friends, while she remained a figure in the background. But Naomi was not blind. She saw the cracks beneath the Redfords' polished surface. She saw how Victor's arrogance masked insecurity, how Clara's perfect social media life was a carefully curated illusion. She saw how Charles's calm authority was nothing but a performance, and how Eleanor's grace was as thin as the expensive silk dresses she wore. Naomi learned to listen, to watch, to read the unspoken language of power and pride. She realized that the Redfords needed her more than they would ever admit. She was their proof of goodness, their shield against criticism, their symbol of compassion. But she also knew that she would never be more than that unless she chose to be. So she studied harder. She stayed up late reading books on leadership, business, and social impact. She applied for scholarships without telling the Redfords and earned a place at a prestigious university. Her world expanded beyond the cold walls of Redford Mansion. But even then, they never acknowledged her success. At her graduation, they didn't attend. "We're proud of you," Eleanor had written in a short, impersonal card. "Remember to always be grateful for the opportunities you've been given." Grateful. That word haunted Naomi. Grateful for what? For being a decoration in their perfect world? For being silenced, corrected, and ignored? For being a symbol instead of a daughter? But Naomi didn't argue. She smiled, She thanked them, and she walked away, her diploma in one hand and a quiet determination in the other. Because Naomi Turner had learned something powerful in her years of silence. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who listens and remembers everything. And Naomi never forgot. Naomi Turner grew up surrounded by marble halls and crystal chandeliers, but her world was one of quiet isolation. While the Redfords basked in the admiration of their wealthy friends, Naomi learned to thrive in the shadows. She wasn't just quiet, she was observant. Every slight, every dismissive glance, every whispered comment behind her back, it all became fuel for her quiet determination. While Clara and Victor enjoyed the spotlight, Naomi embraced the silence. She buried herself in books, devoured every subject she could access, and learned to excel without expecting praise. Her academic achievements were consistent, yet always met with indifference at the Redford mansion. If she came home with an award, Charles would nod, his attention never leaving his newspaper. If she aced an exam, Eleanor would smile briefly, then remind her to always be grateful. But Naomi didn't seek their approval. She sought something far more important: freedom. In high school, she quietly applied for scholarships. She knew she couldn't rely on the Redfords for financial support, and she didn't want to. Her applications were flawless, each one a testament to her resilience and discipline. She wrote essays about overcoming adversity, not with bitterness, but with a quiet grace that masked the pain beneath. One by one, the scholarship offers arrived. Full rides to prestigious universities. Opportunities she had earned entirely on her own. When she told the Redfords, they offered polite congratulations. Charles even commented, "That's impressive, Naomi. We knew our influence would help you succeed." Naomi just smiled, nodding as if she believed them. Leaving for college was a quiet victory. Naomi packed her belongings without fanfare, her room in Redford Mansion left untouched like a guest room that had never truly been hers. Eleanor hugged her lightly, a gesture more out of duty than affection. Charles shook her hand. Clara barely looked up from her phone, and Victor simply nodded. But Naomi didn't feel sad. She felt a strange, exhilarating sense of relief. At college, she thrived. For the first time, she was free to speak her mind, to choose her own friends, to explore her own interests. She majored in business and non-profit management, combining her passion for helping others with her sharp mind for strategy. She worked part-time, managed her own expenses, and never asked the Redfords for a cent. It was during a non-profit workshop in her junior year that she met Ethan Miller. He was a guest speaker, sharp, insightful, but humble. While other speakers boasted about their success, Ethan spoke about his failures, the struggles he faced as a young entrepreneur, and the lessons he learned the hard way. His honesty was refreshing. After his talk, Naomi approached him, not to praise him, but to challenge one of his points. "You said resilience is the most important skill, but what about strategy? What good is resilience without a clear plan?" she asked. Ethan's eyes lit up, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Fair point. But resilience is what keeps you going when the plan falls apart." They exchanged emails, then text messages, then late-night phone calls. Their connection was effortless. With Ethan, Naomi didn't have to be silent. She didn't have to hide her thoughts, her frustrations, or her dreams. He listened, and he cared not because she was a Redford charity case, but because she was Naomi. By the time she graduated, Naomi had a job offer at a non-profit organization that specialized in microgrants for marginalized entrepreneurs, an opportunity she embraced with passion. But her connection with Ethan didn't fade. They continued to see each other, their bond growing stronger with each passing month. When Ethan's startup began to gain traction, attracting investors and national attention, he remained the same, humble, grounded, and genuine. And when he asked Naomi to marry him, it wasn't a grand, public proposal. It was a quiet moment in their favorite coffee shop, just the two of them, his hand shaking slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. They married in Seattle, a small ceremony witnessed by close friends, with no family from either side. Naomi wore a simple white dress. Ethan wore his favorite watch, and their vows were short but true. No pretense, no performances, just two souls promising to stand by each other. But even as she built a life with Ethan, Naomi didn't forget the Redfords. She didn't hate them. She didn't feel enough for them to hate. What she felt was something else, a quiet, persistent need to prove her worth, even if they never acknowledged it. Naomi's non-profit work flourished. She helped distribute microgrants to struggling entrepreneurs, many of whom reminded her of her own journey, people overlooked, underestimated, but quietly resilient. Her network grew, and so did her reputation. But she kept it all quiet, never boasting, never seeking praise. Ethan's startup exploded into success, making headlines and attracting multi-million-dollar valuations. But to Naomi, he was still just Ethan, the man who listened, who believed in her, who saw her for who she truly was. And through it all, Naomi never reached out to the Redfords. Not for approval, not for recognition. But she didn't need to, because even though they never asked, even though they never acknowledged her, the time would soon come when they needed her. And when that time came, Naomi would be ready, not as a silent shadow in their world, but as a woman who had built her own. Naomi Turner and Ethan Miller were a perfect match, not because of wealth or status, but because they understood each other. They were two souls who had learned to navigate a world full of expectations without losing their true selves. For Naomi, Ethan was a safe haven, a place where she could speak freely, laugh openly, and let her guard down. Their love story wasn't marked by grand gestures or lavish displays. It was built in quiet moments, late-night phone calls filled with laughter, rainy afternoons spent reading together, and silent walks where words weren't needed. Ethan never tried to change her, never asked her to be someone else. He loved her for who she was, sharp, resilient, and quietly kind. When Ethan proposed, it wasn't a grand affair. They were sitting on a park bench, sharing a warm pretzel on a chilly autumn evening. He pulled a simple ring from his pocket, his voice steady, but his hands trembling. "Naomi, I don't have a perfect plan for us, but I know I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Naomi smiled, her eyes misty with tears. "Yes, Ethan, 1,000 times, yes." Their wedding was a quiet, intimate ceremony in Seattle. No grand cathedral, no long guest list, just a small garden, a few close friends, and two people promising to stand by each other. Naomi wore a simple white dress, her natural curls free and flowing, untouched by the chemical straighteners that the Redfords had always insisted on. Ethan wore a classic navy suit, but his most important accessory was his genuine, warm smile. There were no cameras, no social media posts, no family drama. Just love. But even as Naomi began a new chapter with Ethan, the shadow of the Redfords lingered. They didn't know about her marriage, and she didn't tell them. Part of her knew they wouldn't approve, not because Ethan wasn't successful, he was, but because he was everything they despised. He was independent, he was black, and most importantly, he was beyond their control. Naomi didn't want their judgment poisoning her happiness, so she lived two lives, one as the silent, obedient, adopted daughter of the Redfords, and another as the confident, independent woman she was becoming alongside Ethan. Ethan understood her hesitation. "You don't owe them anything," he would tell her gently, wrapping his arms around her after a long day. "You don't have to keep going back there." "I know," Naomi would whisper, resting her head against his chest. "But sometimes I wonder if they'll ever change, if they'll ever see me." But the Redfords didn't change. When Naomi visited the mansion, nothing was different. Victor was still the sharp, dismissive attorney, too busy to look up from his phone. Clara was still the social media darling, documenting her curated life while treating Naomi like an accessory. Charles and Eleanor still maintained their polished image, smiling at charity galas and speaking of Naomi as their adopted daughter without ever asking about her life. They didn't know she had a thriving career, helping marginalized entrepreneurs through her non-profit. They didn't know she was married to a man who adored her, and they didn't care to ask. But Naomi kept coming back, not for love, not for approval, but for something else. A quiet, stubborn hope that maybe one day they would see her. Maybe one day they would treat her as more than just a symbol of their generosity. Ethan never pressured her to leave them behind, but he saw the quiet hurt in her eyes each time she returned from the mansion. He saw how she would sit in their small living room, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, staring into the distance. "They're never going to change," he told her one evening, his voice soft but firm. "And that has nothing to do with you, Naomi. It's their blindness, not your worth." Naomi knew he was right, but part of her still wanted to believe that there was something she could do, something that would finally earn their acceptance. That opportunity came sooner than she expected. It started with a phone call from Eleanor, her voice polite but distant as always. "Naomi, we were wondering if you could help us with a small financial issue. It's nothing serious, just a temporary cash flow problem." Naomi's heart raced. They needed her. For the first time, they needed her. "Of course," she replied calmly, masking the whirlwind of emotions inside her. But it wasn't just a small issue. It was the beginning of a financial crisis that threatened the very foundation of Redford Mansion. The family's debts were mounting, taxes unpaid, loans defaulting, and the elegant facade of their perfect life beginning to crack. Naomi helped quietly, without revealing her true capacity. She used her non-profit's shell accounts to clear overdue taxes, paid off a second mortgage through a disguised donation, and even saved Victor's struggling law firm by channeling funds through a legal foundation he didn't know she controlled. But even as she saved them, she remained invisible. A silent guardian, a ghost who gave but never received. And the Redfords continued to treat her like an afterthought, their gratitude as shallow as their concern. Yet Naomi didn't stop, because deep down, she wasn't just helping them. She was testing them, waiting to see if her quiet sacrifices would ever make them see her. And even as she stood beside Ethan, her heart full of love and her life filled with quiet joy, she couldn't shake the shadow of that mansion, the place where she had learned to be grateful, compliant, and invisible. But she didn't realize that her quiet patience was building towards something far more powerful. A moment when the truth would shatter the lies they had built around her. Naomi Turner never wanted the Redfords to suffer. Despite everything they had done or failed to do, she couldn't bring herself to simply stand by and watch them fall. So when Eleanor called again, her voice laced with a false sense of calm, Naomi listened. "It's just a temporary issue, Naomi. A bit of a cash flow problem," Eleanor explained, her tone as polished as ever. "We thought of you because you're always so good with numbers." Naomi's heart tightened. She knew it wasn't just a cash flow problem, it was a financial crisis. Unpaid property taxes, a second mortgage teetering on default, and Victor's law firm struggling to stay afloat. The Redfords' grand facade was crumbling, but they were too proud to admit it. "Of course, I'll see what I can do," Naomi replied, her voice calm, hiding the storm of emotions beneath. But she didn't stop at seeing. Naomi acted. She began using her skills and connections, but always in the shadows. Through her non-profit organization, disguised as an anonymous benefactor, she cleared the Redford Mansion's overdue taxes, paid off the second mortgage, and even funneled funds into Victor's law firm through a legal foundation he didn't know she controlled. Naomi worked late nights, reviewing financial statements and coordinating payments, her face lit only by the soft glow of her laptop. Ethan watched her with quiet concern. "Naomi, why are you doing this? They don't deserve it." "I know," she whispered, not looking up. "But maybe they'll finally see me. Maybe they'll understand." Ethan's sigh was soft but heavy. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Or maybe they'll just keep taking without ever noticing who's saving them. Naomi wanted to believe he was wrong. But part of her knew the truth. The Redfords had always been blind to her. They saw what she did, but never who she was. Days turned into weeks, and Naomi continued her silent rescue mission. She monitored the Redfords' accounts, ensuring their debts were cleared before they became public scandals. When Victor's law firm was on the brink of collapse, she arranged a donation from an anonymous benefactor to a legal foundation, which then quietly transferred funds to his firm. When Eleanor's boutique media venture struggled, Naomi paid the overdue bills without revealing her involvement. The Redfords never questioned their sudden good fortune. To them, it was a testament to the family's resilience, a sign that they were meant to thrive. Naomi watched from the shadows, a silent guardian angel. But the more she helped, the more invisible she seemed to become. The Redfords continued to host grand parties, speak at charity galas, and praise their own generosity, never once mentioning Naomi's name. At one such gala, Naomi stood quietly at the back of the room, her simple black dress blending into the shadows. Eleanor's voice echoed through the grand hall, her tone warm and gracious. As a family, we have always believed in giving back to the community. It is our duty, our honor. The guests applauded, their glasses clinking. Clara posed for photos, her perfect smile never fading. Victor chatted with a group of young attorneys, his voice confident and commanding. And Charles stood at the center, his distinguished figure the embodiment of integrity. But Naomi knew the truth. The grand hall they stood in, the glittering chandeliers, the elegant floral arrangements, all of it existed because of her quiet sacrifices, because she had saved them. Yet no one knew, no one saw. Naomi walked out of the gala that night, the cool evening air brushing against her face. She looked up at the Redford mansion, its bright windows glowing against the dark sky, a symbol of wealth and status, but also of emptiness. She thought of the countless hours she had spent calculating payments, arranging transfers, covering debts, of the sleepless nights spent wondering if they would ever see her for who she was. But the answer was always the same. They wouldn't. "They'll never see you, Naomi," Ethan whispered, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. He had followed her outside, his voice a quiet comfort against the cold. "No matter what you do." "I know," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "But maybe I just need to see it for myself." Ethan's arms tightened around her, his voice gentle but firm. "One day, you're going to stop saving them, and you're going to save yourself." But Naomi wasn't ready for that yet. Not completely. So she continued to help, continued to hide, continued to wait. A part of her still believed that if she just did enough, if she just gave enough, they would finally look at her, truly look at her, and see a daughter, not a prop. But the Redfords didn't change. Charles continued to speak of family honor. Eleanor continued to smile for the cameras. Victor and Clara continued to bask in the family's false glory, never questioning the invisible hands that kept them afloat. And Naomi continued to save them from the shadows, like a ghost, present but unseen. But even ghosts have limits. Even invisible hands can choose to let go. Naomi didn't realize it yet, but she was nearing the edge of her patience, the end of her quiet sacrifices. And when that end came, it wouldn't be with a whisper. It would be a storm. Naomi Turner had never been more invisible than she was at the Redford Foundation Gala. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a grand event filled with glittering chandeliers, classical music, and well-dressed guests sipping champagne beneath the glow of crystal lights. But for Naomi, it was another reminder that no matter how much she gave, she would never truly belong. The Redfords were in their element. Charles Redford, distinguished in a pale linen suit, stood at the center of the room, shaking hands with politicians and business leaders, his deep voice projecting authority. Eleanor floated gracefully among the guests, her diamond necklace catching the light, her smile a perfect mask of warmth. Clara, in an off-white gown, posed for photographs with social media influencers, her laughter a carefully rehearsed melody. Victor, always the confident attorney, held court near the bar, his tone smooth and commanding as he swapped stories with other young lawyers. And Naomi? Naomi was a shadow. Despite being the one who had arranged the partnerships that funded the gala, organized the logistics, and ensured everything ran smoothly, her name was nowhere to be seen. Not in the program, not in the speeches, not even in the thank you list. She was a ghost present, but never acknowledged. Instead of wearing an elegant gown like Clara, Naomi was handed a beige server's uniform, a dull, lifeless outfit designed to blend in with the background. She was assigned to the rear patio, where she would refill glasses and clear empty plates without drawing attention. A silent worker in a world that she had built. "Just stay out of the way, Naomi," Eleanor had whispered before the event began, her tone polite but firm. "Let's keep this about the family's contributions." Naomi didn't argue. She simply put on the uniform, tied her hair back, and took her place among the other servers. But with every glass she refilled, with every polite nod she gave to the guests, a quiet storm began to build inside her. She watched as Charles took the stage, his voice strong and authoritative. "The Redford Foundation has always been about giving back, about making a difference in our community," he declared, his smile confident. The guests applauded, and Charles continued. "We are proud of the work we've done, of the lives we've touched." Naomi's grip tightened around the silver tray in her hands. She wanted to laugh, but there was no humor in it. The Redford Foundation only existed because of her. Her silent donations, her careful management of funds, her sleepless nights spent keeping their debts at bay. But no one knew, no one saw. "Isn't it wonderful?" Clara's voice snapped her back to reality. Naomi turned to see her sister smiling brightly at a group of guests, her hand resting lightly on Naomi's shoulder. "We couldn't do this without all the support of our partners, and of course, the hard work of our wonderful staff." The guests nodded, smiling politely, their eyes glazing over as if Naomi didn't exist. Naomi smiled, a practiced, empty smile. "Of course," she whispered, stepping back, her fingers trembling. But it wasn't over. The true humiliation came later, when one of the guests, a woman in an emerald green gown, accidentally knocked a crystal glass off the table. It shattered against the stone patio, the sound sharp and sudden. Naomi instinctively knelt to pick up the pieces, careful to avoid the sharp edges. "Oh, don't worry," Clara called out, her voice bright and cheerful. "She's used to cleaning up after others." Laughter followed, small, tight, but unmistakable. Naomi felt her cheeks burn, her fingers shaking as she collected the glass shards. One piece slipped, slicing into her palm. A drop of blood welled up, but she didn't flinch. She didn't look up. She didn't cry. She was used to the pain. Naomi stood, her hand wrapped in a napkin, and walked toward the catering tent. She rinsed the cut under cold water, watching the crimson streaks swirl down the drain. Her reflection in the metal sink stared back at her, tired, pale, and defeated. "You don't have to do this," a voice whispered beside her. Naomi turned to see Ethan, who had quietly slipped into the back of the tent. His eyes were filled with concern, his hand reaching out to gently take hers. "I'm fine," she whispered, forcing a smile. "It's just a cut." "It's more than that, and you know it." Ethan's voice was calm, but firm. "You give, and they treat you like you're nothing." Naomi's smile wavered, her vision blurring with tears. I thought maybe this time they would see me, that they would acknowledge me." Ethan's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. "They're blind, Naomi, and they will never see you until you force them to look." Naomi's tears slipped free, soaking into his shoulder. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to feel weak, But she wasn't weak. She was just tired of being invisible, tired of pretending, tired of giving without ever being seen. "Come with me," Ethan whispered, his hand gently wiping away her tears. "You don't have to stay here." "You don't have to be their shadow." But Naomi pulled away, shaking her head. "Not yet," she whispered, her voice steadying. "Not tonight." Because even in her humiliation, even in her pain, a quiet fire burned within her. A fire that wouldn't be snuffed out by shame. Naomi wasn't just a servant in the Redford world. She was its silent foundation, the unseen force that kept them standing. And one day they would see. Whether they liked it or not. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the elegant gardens of Redford Mansion. White tents stood like giant sails, their edges fluttering in the evening breeze. Guests wandered between tables, laughing, sipping champagne, and praising the grandeur of the Redford Foundation Gala. But for Naomi Turner, the air was thick with something else, something suffocating. She stood at her assigned position near the rear patio, dressed in the same beige server's uniform she had worn all evening. Her hand was still bandaged from the cut she'd gotten earlier, but the sting was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. The ache of being invisible, of being nothing more than a shadow in a world she had built. Charles Redford's voice echoed across the garden, his confident tone cutting through the gentle murmur of the crowd. "Friends, thank you all for being here tonight. Your support is what allows the Redford Foundation to continue its mission of giving back, of making a difference." The guests applauded, glasses raised in a toast. Charles stood tall beside Eleanor, who smiled gracefully, her diamond necklace catching the light. Clara posed for photos with her friends, her laughter a bright, polished sound. Victor chatted with a group of young lawyers, his voice cool and commanding. Naomi watched from the shadows, a ghost at her own creation. But then Charles's voice changed, a hint of something playful entering his tone. "And tonight, we thought we would do something a little symbolic, a gesture of reflection on how far we've come." Naomi's heart tightened. Something was wrong. "We would like to acknowledge someone who has always been with us, someone who represents both our legacy and our charity. Naomi, would you please come forward?" Charles called out, his smile wide but cold. Naomi's breath caught. Her feet felt glued to the ground. The guests turned, their curious eyes searching for her. She wanted to run, to disappear. But before she could react, two young event assistants approached her, their hands gentle but firm. "Come with us, please," one of them whispered, oblivious to the tension in her eyes. They led her toward the center of the garden, where a tall, decorative wooden column stood beside the fountain. It was part of the event, an artistic piece meant to mimic ancient architecture, but now it had been repurposed. "We'll make it quick," one of the assistants whispered, trying to sound reassuring. They turned Naomi to face the crowd, her back pressed against the column. Silk ropes, soft but strong, wrapped around her wrists, binding her to the pillar. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest. Her hands trembled, her breathing quickened. Laughter rippled through the crowd, small, polite chuckles at what they thought was a harmless display. A symbolic gesture, Charles had called it. Charles raised his glass, a confident smile on his face. "A reminder of how far we've come," he declared, "how charity can transform lives, how we, as a family, have always believed in giving back." More applause. More laughter. But Naomi didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She stood straight, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her jaw clenched. The silk ropes pressed against her bare wrists, the fabric of her uniform hanging loose and unflattering. She was a display, a living symbol of their generosity. Clara raised her phone, snapping a picture, her smile bright and cheerful. "It's all in good fun," she giggled. Victor leaned toward a guest, murmuring something Naomi couldn't hear, but the guest's laugh told her it wasn't kind. Naomi's vision blurred, Her chest tightened. Her entire life in this family had been a series of humiliations, small, polite rejections, subtle dismissals, quiet corrections. But this was different. This was a spectacle. This was a stage, and she was the exhibit. Charles's voice continued, his tone warm and commanding. Let this be a symbol of our commitment to helping those who need it most. A reminder that even those who start with nothing can be lifted up. A symbol. That's all she had ever been to them. A symbol of their charity, their false compassion, their carefully curated image. Not a daughter, not a sister, just an accessory. The laughter grew softer, and the guests returned to their mingling, their interest in the performance fading. But Naomi remained tied, her pulse pounding in her ears. Her nails dug into her palms, the ropes cutting slightly into her wrists. But she didn't cry, she didn't scream. She didn't beg. If they wanted a symbol, she would give them one. She stood there, her head held high, her eyes fierce and unblinking. They could mock her, they could use her, but they would never break her. But even as the golden light of sunset bathed the garden, a low rumble echoed from the driveway. The guests turned, their laughter quieting. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce glided to a stop near the garden's edge. The driver stepped out, moving quickly to open the rear door. Naomi's heart skipped. Her breath caught. Ethan Miller stepped out of the car, his presence like a storm wrapped in elegance. His navy blue suit was perfectly tailored, his face calm but unreadable. He walked with deliberate steps, his gaze scanning the crowd, cutting through whispers and shocked faces until his eyes found hers. Naomi's eyes filled with tears she had refused to shed for the Redfords. But for Ethan, she couldn't hide her pain. He moved through the crowd without a word, pushing past stunned onlookers until he reached her. He pulled a small knife from his jacket pocket, a quick flick of his wrist slicing through the silk ropes. Her hands fell free, her wrists raw and red. Ethan took her hand gently, raised it to his lips, and kissed the marks. Then he turned, his voice calm but sharp, cutting through the silence. Who thought tying my wife to a post was acceptable? A gasp rippled through the crowd. The Redfords' perfect world began to crack, and for the first time in her life, Naomi was not invisible. She was seen, and so was the truth. The air was thick with tension, the laughter that had filled the garden just moments ago, now replaced by stunned silence. Guests stood frozen, their champagne glasses wavering in their hands, eyes wide with shock. Charles Redford's confident smile faltered, his hand tightening around his glass as if it might shatter. Ethan Miller stood tall, his gaze sweeping across the crowd like a cold wind. His presence was commanding, dark eyes, sharp, his navy blue suit perfectly tailored, a quiet storm wrapped in elegance. But his focus was on one thing, Naomi. Naomi Turner stood beside him, her wrists still red from the silk ropes, her beige server's uniform a cruel reminder of her humiliation. But her head was high, her tear-filled eyes locked on Ethan, a quiet strength radiating from her. I asked a question. Ethan's voice was calm but sharp, slicing through the thick silence. Who thought tying my wife to a post was acceptable? The word hung in the air, wife. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Wife? The guests exchanged shocked glances, some leaning in to whisper, others simply staring. Charles Redford stepped forward, struggling to maintain his composure. Ethan, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is just a symbolic gesture. A bit of light-hearted fun. Light-hearted fun? Ethan's gaze shifted to Charles, his expression unchanging. Humiliating a woman in front of a crowd? Stripping her of her dignity? That's your idea of fun? Ethan, please, Eleanor chimed in, her voice strained but still carrying that polished tone. This is just a family tradition, a way to reflect on our values.
Ethan's jaw tightened. Values?
I've seen your values. They're as hollow as your charity speeches. A nervous laugh escaped Clara's lips, but it died quickly under Ethan's piercing stare. Victor cleared his throat, stepping forward.
Look, this is just a misunderstanding. Naomi, she's just part of the family. Part of the family. Ethan's voice was almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that silenced everyone. You mean the part you hide? The part you mock? The part you treat like a servant? Charles's face turned pale, his fingers twitching. We have always provided for Naomi. We gave her a home, an education. Provided? Ethan's voice rose, not with anger, but with a quiet, unyielding authority. You used her. You displayed her as a symbol of your generosity. You paraded her like a trophy of your false virtue. But when it came time to show her love, respect, or even basic decency, you gave her nothing. Charles's lips parted, but no words came out. The guests murmured, some looking away, others staring in stunned silence. Naomi stood beside Ethan, her hand slipping into his. His touch was warm, steady, a quiet reassurance that she was no longer alone. She looked at the faces of the Redfords, Charles, Eleanor, Clara, Victor, and saw something she had never seen before. Fear. Not fear of her, but fear of the truth. Fear of being exposed. I never wanted your approval. Naomi's voice was steady, her eyes clear. I never needed your praise. I only ever wanted to be seen, to be treated like a person. But you were too blind, too proud, too cold. Naomi, Eleanor began, but Naomi's voice cut through her polished calm. Save it, Naomi whispered, her voice strong, her heart pounding. You didn't raise me, you didn't love me, you just used me. And now everyone sees it. Charles's face twisted with anger, his voice shaking. We gave you everything, a home, an education, and I gave you everything. Naomi's voice rose, her frustration and pain pouring out. I saved this house from foreclosure. I paid your debts. I bailed out Victor's failing law firm. I covered Clara's media venture when it was bleeding money. I did it all, not because you deserved it, but because I thought maybe you'd finally see me. A hush fell over the crowd, the weight of her words settling like a storm cloud. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. This house, this estate, it stands because of Naomi. Your debts, your reputations, your perfect little world, it was all saved by the woman you humiliated tonight. Charles's hands shook, his voice a whisper. That's impossible. Ethan reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a folded document, holding it up. 3 months ago, this house went into default. Naomi used her own Funsher savings, her investments to buy it through a shell company. She owns this house, not you. A collective gasp swept through the guests. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her diamond bracelet catching the fading sunlight. Victor and Clara stood frozen, their faces pale. No, Charles whispered, stumbling back. This can't be. It is, Naomi whispered, her voice clear but soft. Everything you thought you owned, it was only yours because I saved it, and I saved you, even though you never saved me. Ethan's gaze swept the crowd, his voice calm but powerful. You have 10 minutes to leave this property. Pack what you need and go. This is no longer your home. Charles looked around desperate, but the guests had already begun to back away, whispers spreading like wildfire. His proud facade crumbled, his eyes pleading. Please, we can talk about this. We're family. No, Naomi whispered, a quiet strength in her voice. We never were. Ethan's hand tightened gently around hers. Let them go, Naomi. Naomi nodded, her heart finally steady. As the Redfords turned, stumbling toward the house, the guests whispered and watched, some shocked, some embarrassed for having cheered just moments ago.
But Naomi didn't watch them leave. She didn't need to. For the first time in her life, she felt light-free. Ethan's arm wrapped around her, pulling her close.
"You did it," he whispered. Naomi smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. But this time, it wasn't a tear of pain. It was a tear of release. "I'm done being invisible," she whispered. The guests were still murmuring, their shocked whispers hanging in the cool evening air like a lingering fog. Charles Redford, once a towering figure of respect and authority, now looked like a man stripped of his power. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped. Eleanor stood beside him, her manicured fingers trembling as she clutched his arm. Naomi Turner stood beside Ethan Miller, her hand still in his. The warmth of his palm grounded her, reminding her that she was not alone anymore. She glanced at the mansion, the towering symbol of power and privilege that had loomed over her life. Tonight, it felt smaller, less intimidating. Ethan's voice broke the uneasy silence. "You didn't raise a daughter, you raised a servant. Someone you could display as proof of your generosity. But tonight, everyone sees the truth." Charles tried to regain his composure, forcing a strained smile. "Now, hold on, this is a misunderstanding. Naomi has always been part of this family. We've given her everything, a home, an education." Ethan cut him off with a calm, unyielding tone. "You didn't give her anything. She earned it, and when your debts piled up and your perfect world started to crumble, it wasn't your charity that saved you. It was Naomi." Eleanor shook her head, her voice shaking. "That's absurd. Naomi doesn't have that kind of money." Ethan pulled out the document again, handing it to Charles. "This deed proves otherwise. The house, the estate, everything you call yours, it's in Naomi's name now. She bought it through a shell company when it was about to be foreclosed. You've been living here on her generosity, not the other way around." Charles snatched the paper, his hands trembling as he scanned the words. Eleanor leaned over, her eyes widening as she read the fine print. Victor and Clara hovered behind them, their faces drained of color. "But how?" Charles whispered, his voice hollow. Naomi took a deep breath, finally finding her voice. "When you were too proud to admit your financial problems, I stepped in. I paid the property taxes you neglected. I covered the mortgage you couldn't afford. I used my savings, my own investments. Not because I owed you anything, but because I hoped, maybe, you'd finally see me, appreciate me. But you never did." Clara scoffed, shaking her head. "You're lying. This is just some trick." Ethan's gaze hardened. "It's not a trick. I helped Naomi set up the shell company. I watched her pour her savings into keeping this place standing, while you all kept pretending your life was perfect." Victor stepped forward, trying to salvage his pride. "You're telling me that Naomi, the girl who barely spoke, somehow became the owner of this estate?" "That's ridiculous." Naomi's eyes met his, unwavering. "You always underestimated me, Victor. You never saw how hard I worked, how I studied every night while you partied. I built a career, I earned my own money, and when this house was about to be taken from you, I saved it. I did it because I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd see me differently, that you'd finally consider me part of the family." Eleanor tried to smile, forcing a tone of warmth. "Naomi, dear, we've always thought of you as family." "No," Naomi said firmly, her voice no longer trembling. "You thought of me as your project, your proof that you weren't the selfish, cold-hearted people you really are. But family doesn't treat family like you treated me. Family doesn't tie someone to a post for amusement. Family doesn't ignore, dismiss, or humiliate one of their own." Charles looked around at the guests, desperate to regain control. "This is just a misunderstanding. Naomi, come now. You know we love you." "Love?" Naomi repeated, her voice filled with quiet disbelief. "You never loved me?" "You loved the idea of me, the symbol of your charity, but you never cared about me as a person. You never asked how I was doing, never supported my dreams, never once treated me as your daughter."
The guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had been complicit in the Redfords' charade. A few of them stepped back, clearly wanting no part in the unfolding disgrace. Ethan took a step closer to Naomi, his hand on her shoulder. You can't manipulate her anymore. You can't use her to prop up your reputation. Everyone here sees the truth now. You exploited her kindness, her loyalty, and her desire to belong. But that ends tonight. Naomi looked at the faces around her, the guests who had once looked past her, the family who had dismissed her, the so-called friends who had laughed at her humiliation. And she realized that Ethan was right. She didn't need their validation anymore. Eleanor tried one last time, her voice dropping to a pleading tone. Naomi, please. You don't understand how hard it's been. We did what we thought was best. No, Naomi replied, her voice firm. You did what was best for yourselves. You didn't care about me. You just wanted to look good. Victor sneered, his ego bruised. So what now? You think you're better than us because you bought a house? Naomi looked at him calmly. No, Victor? I don't think I'm better than you, but I know I'm stronger. I survived in your world without becoming cruel, without losing my empathy. I chose kindness, even when you gave me every reason to become bitter. Charles dropped the deed, his hands shaking. What are you going to do now? Naomi looked at Ethan, then back at the Redfords. I'm going to live my life on my terms. I'm not going to keep saving people who never cared to save me. Ethan smiled softly, pride evident in his eyes. We're leaving. This place belongs to Naomi now. You have until tomorrow to pack your things and go. The Redfords stood there, stunned and defeated, while the guests slowly dispersed, muttering about the shocking revelation. Naomi felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. The weight of years of silence, pain, and longing finally lifted. As she turned away from the mansion, Ethan wrapped his arm around her, and for the first time, Naomi didn't feel like a ghost. She felt real, strong, and at last free. Naomi Turner stood on the wide cobblestone driveway of Redford Mansion, watching as the movers carried out boxes, antique furniture, and gilded portraits. The once proud Redford family, Charles, Eleanor, Victor, and Clara, hovered nearby, their faces pale and tight with disbelief. The grand estate, with its towering white columns and manicured gardens, now felt like a crumbling stage, and they were actors whose roles had ended. Charles stood stiffly, barking orders at the movers, trying to maintain a shred of his former authority. But his voice lacked the weight it once carried. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, her diamond bracelet catching the morning light, but her tears were more for the loss of status than for the loss of family. Victor leaned against his sleek sports car, tapping nervously at his phone, desperately trying to find a solution, a loophole, anything to reverse this nightmare. Clara sulked beside him, her arms crossed, her face a mixture of anger and embarrassment. For the first time in their lives, the Redfords had become the ones being dismissed, overlooked, and left behind. Naomi stood a few steps away, her expression calm but firm. Ethan Miller stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a quiet support, a reminder that she wasn't alone. They watched in silence as the family who had once used her, ignored her, and humiliated her was forced to pack their perfect world into cardboard boxes. Eleanor's voice broke the silence, brittle and sharp. I don't understand how this happened. We gave you everything, Naomi. A home, an education. No, you gave me a prison. Naomi's voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. You gave me a place to exist, but never a place to belong. You dressed me up to show off your charity, but you never let me be part of the family. Charles stepped forward, his face red with anger. You're being ungrateful. We took you in when no one else would. We made you who you are. Naomi's eyes met his, calm but fierce. No. I made myself who I am. I built my career. I saved this house with my own money. I saved your reputations when they were crumbling. And what did you do? You tied me to a post and called it symbolic. The words hung in the air, and for once, Charles had nothing to say. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but cold. You were never a family to her. You were her captors. And now you're just tenants being evicted. Victor laughed bitterly. Evicted? From our own home? It was never your home, Naomi whispered, her voice cutting like a quiet blade. Not really. You lived in a fantasy, a world you built on appearances, lies, and borrowed wealth. But the truth is, without me, you'd have nothing. Eleanor's hand trembled, her voice breaking. Please, Naomi, we're family. We can work this out. Family? Naomi's voice softened, but it didn't lose its strength. A family loves. A family protects. A family listens. You never did any of that. You just used me. The movers continued to load the truck, their quiet efficiency a stark contrast to the desperate energy of the Redfords. A crystal vase shattered on the driveway, its sparkling shards scattering like the fragments of their perfect image. Naomi took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of peace. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't even sad. She was free. Naomi, please. Eleanor tried again, but her voice was a ghost of the confident woman she had once been. Naomi looked at her, her expression calm but distant. I spent years trying to earn your love. I gave you everything I had, my time, my money, my silence. But I don't owe you anything anymore. Ethan's hand squeezed her shoulder gently, and Naomi smiled, feeling warmth where there had once been cold. You have until tomorrow to leave, Naomi continued, her voice steady. Take whatever you need. But this house is mine now. My life is mine now. Victor's face twisted with bitterness. You'll regret this. One day you'll see we were right. Naomi smiled, a soft, genuine smile. Maybe. But at least now I get to make my own mistakes. I get to live my own life. Clara tried to speak, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. She turned away, wiping at her eyes. The Redfords, a family of power, prestige, and pride, were now just a group of people being forced to face the truth of their own emptiness. As the last of the boxes were loaded and the movers shut the truck doors, Charles turned one last time. Naomi, please. But Naomi simply looked at him, her expression soft but resolute. Goodbye, Charles. And with that, she turned away, walking with Ethan back toward the mansion that was now truly hers. Inside, the air felt different, lighter, warmer. The grand hall, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, no longer felt like a cold, empty stage. It felt like a space full of possibility. Ethan leaned against the doorway, his smile gentle. You did it. Naomi laughed, a light, joyful sound that echoed through the empty hall. We did it. Ethan crossed the room, pulling her into his arms. So, Mrs. Turner, what's the first thing you want to do with your newfound freedom? Naomi looked around, her gaze landing on the grand portrait of Charles and Eleanor still hanging over the fireplace. She walked over, lifted it off the wall, and placed it face down on the floor. Redecorate, she said with a grin. Ethan laughed, his eyes shining with pride and affection. I love that plan. Naomi leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like herself strong, free, and finally seen. And as the sunlight poured through the tall windows, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow, Naomi knew that this was just the beginning. Her life was hers now, and she was ready to live it. Naomi Turner woke up to the gentle warmth of sunlight streaming through the tall windows of Redford Mansion, her mansion. The room felt different now. What was once a cold, imposing space now felt open, airy and filled with light. Naomi lay in bed for a moment, her gaze tracing the soft shadows on the ceiling, her chest rising and falling in a steady, calm rhythm. For the first time in her life, she wasn't waking up with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She didn't have to prepare for another day of being invisible, of staying silent, of being ignored. Today, she could simply be. The scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted from the kitchen, a comforting aroma that brought a soft smile to her lips. She slipped on a simple robe, her bare feet padding quietly across the polished hardwood floor as she followed the scent. In the kitchen, Ethan Miller stood at the stove, humming softly to himself as he flipped pancakes. He wore a plain white t-shirt and grey sweatpants, his hair slightly messy, a warm, relaxed smile on his face. "Good morning, Mrs. Turner," he greeted, his voice filled with a playful warmth. Naomi's smile widened, her heart swelling with a quiet joy. "Good morning, Mr. Miller." She walked over, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, resting her cheek against his back. His hand reached back, gently covering hers. They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, the soft sizzle of pancakes the only sound. "I made your favorite blueberry pancakes with a hint of cinnamon," Ethan announced, carefully sliding one onto a plate. "Figured we could start our first day of freedom with something sweet." Naomi chuckled, stepping around to pour herself a cup of coffee. "Every day feels like a first day of freedom now." Ethan's smile softened, his gaze filled with affection. "It is, and it will be for as long as we want it to be." They carried their plates to the sunlit dining area, a space that had once been a place of stiff, silent meals beneath the watchful eyes of the Redfords. But now, it was filled with warmth, sunlight spilling across the table, fresh flowers in a simple vase, the quiet clink of forks, and the sound of soft laughter. As they ate, Naomi's eyes wandered to the open doorway leading to the garden. The same garden where she had once been, humiliated, tied to a post like an exhibit. But now, that memory felt distant, almost like a story she had read about someone else. "Do you want to go for a walk later?" Ethan suggested. "Or maybe we could finally pick out some paint colors for your studio?" Naomi's eyes lit up. Her studio, the room she had always dreamed of, an art space filled with canvases, brushes, and paints. A place where she could create, express herself, and simply be. "I love that idea," she replied, her voice warm with excitement. "I've always wanted to paint the garden, but this time, with the sunlight, not the shadows." Ethan reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." They finished breakfast, and Ethan quickly cleared the dishes, humming a cheerful tune as he worked. Naomi wandered into the hallway, her bare feet cool against the polished floor. The mansion was still grand, but it no longer felt oppressive. It was simply a house now, a place she could transform into a home. The heavy portraits of the Redfords had been taken down, replaced with simple, calming landscape paintings. The grand chandelier in the foyer, which had always felt like a symbol of wealth and power, now glowed with a soft, warm light. The echoes of cold, polite conversations were gone, replaced by the quiet, comforting sounds of Ethan's voice, the soft rustle of curtains, and the distant chirping of birds outside. Naomi found herself wandering into the garden, the soft grass cool beneath her feet. She closed her eyes, feeling the gentle breeze against her face, the warmth of the sun on her skin. For so many years, this place had been a stage, a place where she was displayed, ignored, and humiliated. But not anymore. Now, it was just a garden, her garden, a place where she could plant flowers, read under the shade of the tall oak tree, or simply sit and breathe. She didn't have to hide. She didn't have to be invisible. She didn't have to prove anything to anyone. Ethan stepped outside, a small basket in his hand. "I thought we could pick some flowers for the dining table," he suggested, his smile gentle and warm. Naomi laughed, a light, joyful sound that seemed to float on the breeze. "I'd love that." Together, they wandered through the garden, Naomi's fingers brushing against the soft petals of roses and daisies. She chose a mix of bright, cheerful colors: yellow, pink, and white, while Ethan playfully tried to add a handful of wildflowers. "Are you trying to turn our dining table into a meadow?" Naomi teased, a soft laugh in her voice. Ethan grinned. Maybe I just want to see you smile." Naomi leaned against him, her cheek resting against his shoulder. "You do that every day, Ethan." They returned to the house, placing the bouquet in a simple glass vase. Naomi watched the flowers bloom under the sunlight, their colors bright and full of life. Her life was no longer a stage, no longer a performance, no longer a prison. It was hers. It was real. And it was just beginning. "Naomi?" Ethan's voice was gentle, pulling her from her thoughts. "What do you want to do next?" Naomi smiled, her eyes shining with a quiet, steady joy. "Everything. I want to do everything." And with Ethan's hand in hers, she knew she would. A few weeks after reclaiming the mansion, Naomi Turner received an ornate white envelope in the mail. The thick embossed paper bore the elegant crest of the Redfords, and her name was written in delicate gold script, Ms. Naomi Turner. But as she held it, a faint smile touched her lips. They hadn't even bothered to get her name right. It should have read Mrs. Naomi Miller. She turned the envelope over and carefully broke the wax seal. Inside was an invitation, an elaborate card decorated with floral patterns and cursive text. "You are cordially invited to the engagement party of Clara Redford and Bradley Winslow." Naomi's smile faded. Clara was getting engaged, and they wanted her to be there after everything that had happened, after they had been forced to leave the mansion, after the truth had been laid bare. Part of her felt a rush of disbelief. Did they think one fancy invitation would erase everything? Did they imagine she would simply smile and pretend the past didn't exist? Ethan entered the room, carrying a tray with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "What's that?" he asked, noticing the letter in her hand. Naomi handed it to him without a word, watching as he scanned the text. His eyebrows lifted, and a chuckle escaped his lips. "An engagement party? Are they serious?" Naomi shrugged, taking her coffee and curling up on the plush couch. "I suppose they think I'd just forgive and forget, that I'd show up, smile and play the part of the grateful adopted daughter." Ethan sat beside her, one arm resting around her shoulders. "You're not even the adopted daughter anymore. You're the woman who took back her life." Naomi leaned against him, a warmth spreading through her chest. He was right. She wasn't that silent, invisible girl anymore. She was Naomi Turner, Naomi Miller Strong, independent and free. "What are you going to do?" Ethan asked, a playful curiosity in his voice. Naomi thought for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. She could ignore the invitation. She could write a polite refusal. Or she could do something that truly spoke to who she had become. A quiet smile crossed her lips. "I think I'll send them a little gift." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, a gift? Now you've got me curious." Naomi stood, crossing the room to the small bookshelf where she kept a photo album. She pulled out a picture one of her and Ethan standing together at a recent gala, both of them laughing, their eyes bright, their arms wrapped around each other. A picture that radiated joy, freedom, and love. She grabbed a silver marker and, with a steady hand, signed the back of the photo. "From the useless girl you raised, thank you for setting me free." Ethan's grin widened. "Savage. I love it." Naomi slipped the photo into an envelope, sealed it, and addressed it to the Redfords. No long letter, no apology, no explanation, just a simple, silent reminder of who she had become. The next day she mailed it, and as the envelope disappeared into the mailbox slot, she felt a lightness she hadn't expected. She didn't hate them. There was no bitterness left. What she felt was something closer to pity. They were still trapped in their world of appearances and pride, still clinging to the illusion of their perfect family. But she was free. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow across the garden, Naomi and Ethan sat together on the back patio. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and the scent of blooming flowers filled the air. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a soft smile playing at his lips. "So, Mrs. Miller, what's next?" Naomi sipped her tea, her gaze sweeping over the garden where she had once been humiliated, where she had once been nothing but a symbol. But now it was her haven, her place of peace. "I want to finish my painting," she said, her voice calm but filled with quiet joy, "the one of the garden at sunset. But this time I want to add more light." "More colors," Ethan smiled, his hand reaching across the table to take hers. "I like that. A painting filled with light." Naomi's fingers intertwined with his, a soft, contented smile on her face. "Because that's what my life is now. Light, freedom, choice." They sat there, watching the sky change from gold to soft pink, then to deep indigo. And as the stars began to appear, Naomi felt a quiet sense of peace settling over her heart. She had once been a prisoner in her own life, a silent, obedient shadow in the Redfords' perfect world, but now she was so much more. A woman who had reclaimed her voice, a wife loved and cherished, an artist painting her own future, one stroke at a time. Back in the city, the Redfords would open her envelope. They would see the picture of Naomi and Ethan happy, free, and radiant. And they would read her message, a quiet but powerful reminder that the girl they once dismissed had become a woman they could never control. But Naomi wouldn't be thinking of them anymore. She had nothing to prove, nothing to justify. She had a life of her own now, a life filled with light, love, and endless possibilities. And she was just getting started. Naomi Turner woke up to the gentle warmth of sunlight streaming through her window. The soft morning light painted golden patterns across the room, and a cool breeze rustled the curtains. She smiled, stretching beneath the soft sheets, feeling the quiet peace of a new day. Downstairs, the scent of fresh coffee drifted through the house. She could hear Ethan humming to himself in the kitchen, his voice a warm, comforting presence that made the house feel alive. Naomi wrapped herself in a light robe and made her way down, her bare feet cool against the polished hardwood floors. In the kitchen, Ethan turned, his smile brightening when he saw her. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller. I made your favorite blueberry pancakes." Naomi laughed, crossing the room to kiss him. "You spoil me." "I try," he replied, wrapping his arms around her, his touch warm and steady. They stood there for a moment, swaying gently, the quiet morning light wrapping around them. After breakfast, Naomi wandered into her art studio, a sunlit room filled with canvases, brushes, and jars of vibrant paints. Her latest painting stood on an easel, a garden scene bathed in warm sunlight, bright flowers blooming beneath a wide open sky. Naomi picked up a brush, dipping it into a rich shade of gold. As she added soft rays of light to the canvas, her heart felt light. This was her life now, a life of choice, a life of color, a life where she was free to create, to dream, to love. She was no longer the silent, invisible girl of the Redfords. She was Naomi Turner, Naomi Miller, a woman who had reclaimed her voice, her freedom, and her happiness. Ethan appeared in the doorway, a soft smile on his face. "How's it coming along?" "It's almost done," Naomi replied, stepping back to admire her work. "But I think it needs a little more light." Ethan walked over, slipping his arms around her from behind. "Just like you," he whispered. "Always bringing light wherever you go." Naomi leaned into his embrace, her smile warm and steady. "And now, I get to share it with you." as the sunlight poured through the windows, filling the room with a soft golden glow. Naomi felt a quiet, unshakable peace. Her past was behind her. Her future was hers to paint.
And she was just getting started. Naomi Turner's journey is a powerful reminder that true value is not determined by how others see you, but by how you see yourself. Despite growing up in a world of wealth and prestige, she was treated as a symbol rather than a person ignored, dismissed, and humiliated. Yet, Naomi didn't let the coldness of others define her. Instead, she chose resilience. She worked hard, built a successful life, and found love in someone who valued her for who she truly was. Her story teaches us that self-worth is not something given, it is something you claim. Even when others fail to recognize your value, you must never forget it. Naomi's quiet strength, her ability to give without expecting recognition, and her courage to reclaim her life serve as a powerful lesson. Kindness is a strength, not a weakness, but it must never come at the cost of your own dignity. For older audiences, Naomi's journey is a call to reflect on the importance of self-respect, the power of quiet perseverance, and the freedom that comes from letting go of toxic relationships. Sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself